Alright, so um, I've been kind of processing this a little bit, where I keep wondering about how far we're headed in terms of as a collective. Then I realize it's like, well, we move as a collective as we move as a collective. And one of the things I've learned for myself is what works for me is because I love languages, right? And this is just kind of like a short, my little spiel about this. And I was talking to my dad about, being misunderstood, and a lot of people find that it's like kind of like whoosh, goes over their head when I say something, especially when it comes to things that I feel like I understand. And one of the things I understand is that there's always opportunities and possibilities of everything is connected. It's just everything is connected. The moment I learned about that, or at least I kept learning about it, or like I noticed it's like, oh yeah, that's right. Everything is connected. So that means that when it comes to something as simple as like languages, right? It's not really the languages that I love. It's more like the mystery behind it. Like, why do I love languages? What is it about it? What is it about? Like, first, yeah, there is this whole thing that I want to connect with people, but there's a mystery because it's like it feels different. I've always been kind of drawn to different. But I feel like when it comes to languages, we're still very left-brainy about it. And there's nothing wrong with left-brainy. It's not about right or wrong here. It's more about figuring out a way that kind of like wondering, how did you get all that stuff when you were a child? When you were, being exposed to your mother tongue. Could be one language, could be two, it doesn't matter. But you were exposed to it somehow. But what I'm trying to say is, when I talk about, this is in past videos, but like when it comes to childlikeness, I keep saying this, but it's like childlikeness. What is that? Was this just really being like a child? Well, yeah, it is. It's very simple. And yet we don't really do it. We forget that it's like, what is that? What is that? I've forgotten how to be like a child. We think it's just literally like playing. It's being present. And how that ties into really like language itself is because if you look at it in what's called the formative years, where I think around 1 year old to around 0 to about 8 years old, it's our formative years. So apparently we're, like this coach that I work with, he says that it's like the theta state. Well, that makes sense because we're very absorbing. We absorb things like a sponge, right? And that ties into the subconscious area of the brain, this area. I was talking to my dad about it, and we were talking about how it's like the subconscious part of the brain is like one area. It's not really. It's all connected. It's all connected. It's all connected. And I say this because I feel like I know this, but for people to understand it, it's kind of hard for me to describe, because it's like, well, how do you describe that? What is that? Like, what is the childlikeness? What is all this, like, even if it's like spirituality or intuition, all that stuff, like, what is that? I think that it comes down to your learned personality, let's call it that way, in this form. I think a lot of people are starting to realize now that it's like, oh yeah, the form is temporary. Our real life, our real being, our real essence is formless. I'm just going to put it that way because it's like, that's just what I know. And what it means is basically, people call it like the formless is like the soul, our connection to our higher self, our non-corporeal self, so energy. And then our form is the form that's, to me, they're not separate. At least it's starting to make sense now, I mean, instinctively, because I've always been kind of that person who is very instinctive, and I just know. When you know, you know, you know, right? It's not knowing here, no. It's like an internal knowing. And I think this is one of the things that I feel like kind of gets me into trouble with certain friends. Like, they don't understand what I'm saying, and I feel left out. I feel invalidated. I feel, and when I was talking to my dad, I was like, the reason I get so passionate about languages, for me, myself, like when I talk about it if I were talking about it in a real way, sometimes it may come off like as I'm trying to blame or point fingers and tell others, just like, get your fucking ass straight, like, get your act straight and stop doing the grammar thing, blah, 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 all that stuff. While I personally don't believe in studying anymore, and ironically and hypocritically speaking, I do have my job that I have right now is I do the traditional methods and all that stuff. But this isn't, for me, if it's like, it is about methods that help sometimes. When I say it is about, I mean like what the majority of the world still does. But I don't believe in that. I don't believe in that. And so why am I doing that work, right? It sounds hypocritical. Yes. To be honest, the job is a means to an end. It's not the kind of, like, I can do better. I mean, the real reason I'm keeping the job is, to be honest with myself, is because I need it. Right? To do what I'm doing right now. Do the work that I'm doing right now. And that is right now, I'm still figuring out. It's not really one thing. I think what I'm trying to figure out it's not necessarily to be figure outable. Doesn't have to be something that it's like, what is it that I need to do? I think in my journey right now is to kind of just find courage. I'm looking at this more from an astrological point of view, but it's like, it's tied into it, why I've been like, autonomy, sovereignty, courage, boldness, power, control, right? And learning really about that. But real control comes from that childlikeness thing. And how is that connected? Well, because if you're not it's like that line from Doctor Strange, where the Ancient One said, what was it? What was the line? You cannot beat a river into submission. You must surrender to its current and use it as your own or for your own, something like that. So basically, it's just really going with the flow. But how do we go with the flow? And when we're talking about languages, it's like, get very technical, because as the adult self, we want to, we want the answers right away, because we feel like we're running out of time. At least for me, the reason I would do that is I feel like whenever I go through the process of, like, I have like these like non-translated textbooks. They're like textbooks in like PDF format, and I look at them and it's just like, I know that it's not going to really work, yet I still do it because I find it's like, why am I doing this? So I've come to one, or maybe a couple of things why I do that, is because, I don't know, I feel like I don't want to miss opportunities. But that comes from a place of like, well, then I am going to miss opportunity if I do that. So it comes from a place of lack. It comes from a place of, okay. So despite the fact that I love languages and all that stuff, why is it that I'm doing it in the first place? I mean, I was fascinated by it I remember being fascinated by Japanese the first time. I remember just going into it and be like, there was this book I had, I don't know, it had pictures on it, like how to remember or memorize the kanas and all that stuff. If you know Japanese stuff, like the kana, like the writing system, the basic Japanese writing system, not the kanji. It was fun. because I saw pictures and I was like, okay, that helped me kind of remember them. They were mnemonics, basically. For those who don't know what mnemonics is, it's a kind of a image that helps you remember something. It's kind of like images we're familiar with. Like a body, or positioning of a body. Because symbols are not natural for the human brain yet, at least in my experience, not the research I've done, but the research that I've looked into, that mnemonics help with that. But symbols like letters and numbers, and like say shapes themselves, like the things that are not from nature, the things that didn't come to nature naturally, like for example the round shape, for example, versus something that was constructed where it's like I don't know, maybe the breaking of a round into like pies. That's probably something that's a bit symbolic to the brain. I know that doesn't kind of make sense right now, but what I'm trying to say is that when it comes to all this stuff about language, when I was talking to my dad, it's just like there's just this thing that I know it just works. At least for me it works, but it came to the point where it was just what works for me is what works for me. What works for you is what works for you. But at the same time, you kind of want to have to look at it more from not the adult ego perspective, but looking at it from the source, meaning like our source energy, our real essence of like, what is it? First of all, like, why is it we worry into languages? Is it because I need to travel? I need to move because of work? Or is it because I'm trying to prove to others that I'm good at this? Like, because for me, that's one of the things too. When I got into like the first language I got into, it's like outside of like my third language technically was Cantonese, and then Japanese was my fourth. Cantonese was like I was interested in because I was like, okay, because of the people. I realized when I had friends that were Cantonese speakers, like from Hong Kong. This is way back in the day. I was like, I wanted to connect with them. So for me, that was the root. I feel one of the root. I wouldn't say root, but because people actually, in truth, I want to connect, but there's a lot of mistrust and distrust because I feel like whenever I see something, people misunderstand it or they misconstrue it. They don't accept it. They have judgment right away. They get an opinion right away. What I really want is people to be there. So how this ties into childlikeness is exactly what this is. Children don't do that. Children might take something from another child, but the child will probably be like cry, but it won't take it personally, right? Once we start to develop that ego, we start to go, oh, like, screw you, fuck you, you did this to me, kind of thing, and you took my toy away, kind of thing. It's just kind of, it's the ego. And again, this is not about neglecting, suppressing, rejecting, avoiding, disowning, even just the ego itself. The ego is a natural part of ourselves. We can work with that by acknowledging the fact that the ego, what the ego wants is really to be itself. That the ego is a natural part of being, So how this ties into the whole childlikeness and language is that when we go back into our childlikeness, we become more present. And that ties into the whole, like, being in that theta state of, like, being absorbing. And then when it's natural to speak again, because I saw this one video, this one guy, he talks about how translation kind of works, and for me it doesn't work when it comes to trying to acquire something, because what happens is that there's something about, and I don't know about the research on this, and to be honest with you, I don't care, because the research might prove what it is, but it's already there, right? You can have fun with the research, great, but let's not impose the research as if it's the research to prove and prove and prove something like self-worth and trying to make sure that I'm right, you're wrong. No, the research is there to support the truth that's already there. or the truth that's already there for me at least, is that when it comes to translation, I only use it as a means to an end. So for example, if I'm looking at videos for children, that's what I do several at times, where I look at videos, like I literally type in like translation for what is cartoons for children, because I want to look at visual cues. I want to have visual cues. I want to start simple. Right? I want to start simple. I want to start acquiring. I mean, you can call it acquire, you can call it picking up, it doesn't really matter. Children don't do that. They just go like, okay, they're very observant. It's a theta state. This theta state sort of thing where it's just like, okay, you know, you're very absorbing, you're very observant, you're absorbing, you're present. You're just like, okay, cool. But when they speak, when we were children, when we spoke, it wasn't cohesive, it wasn't there. But we knew how to communicate. And I think that's the root of it. And I think as adults, we're afraid of starting with that. We're in a hurry to get into like, I want to write this sentence, I want to get into this sentence right away. I want to be able to connect. But where does that come from? That's the big question. So where we need to ask ourselves, where does that come from? Why do I need to rush this? First of all, and before that, why do I need to rush in the first place? What's the rushing for? What is there to rush? Are you going to die tomorrow? And that's the most important thing. You see what I mean? So for me, it's all about connecting and relating with people. But underneath the connection, the reason why I want to connect with people is because we notice that when they're from a different culture, that culture is like a filter, right? And once you go past that filter, you need to use that filter. Language and culture are filters to a collective and an individual. Right? Doesn't that make sense? I don't know about you, but I don't know if it makes sense to you. It makes sense to me. So the whole point of it is really reclaiming our childhood, reclaiming the inner child that we've had, the inner child issues we've had, trauma mainly, and heal from that, and then come back to it and start to come back to that sort of that theta state, at least when it comes to language. So that's the role of the conscious and the subconscious, or the unconscious, right? Every part has a role. Just like everything has a role, everything has a connection, everything is connected, everything has a role, it's all connected. But we as adults, and this reliance on as if the ego is the only thing, we think that this is one way or the other, and this is all in a box and all that stuff. This is why it's becoming clear to me now. We're just like, okay, well, if you are a quick-minded person, like you're very fast sort of thinker, fast communicator, and you can watch movies and TV shows in your target language, and the subtitles in something else in a different language, or vice versa. If you find that works for you, go ahead and do that. It doesn't work for me, right? Personally, I believe that it's like, for me, even if I were to do that and it still works, am I really grasping the intention, not the intention, how do you call this, the feel behind? It's easy to work with, let's say, concrete objects, like for example, like this, like an eraser. An eraser is an eraser. It's not going to have much of a cultural, subjective sort of like deeper meaning behind it. An eraser is an eraser, right? A pencil is a pencil, like, like a finger is a finger, a nail is a nail, right? This is just what it is. But I'm talking about once it gets into the part where it becomes more abstract, it ties in with also the concrete stuff. Because, like, so for example, I don't know, there's something about it. There's something about it's kind of like these, it's like there's these connections, there's these wires, so to speak, of the personality of that language. Just like when you were born in this body, right? The wires behave in a certain way. They have their own sort of like, it's a community, it's an ecology, it's an ecosystem, so to speak. That is, it's an ecosystem of the nerves and the cells and the skin and the bones and all that stuff, and all the systems in the body. It's a whole ecosystem on its own that is not separate from everything else. However, it has become separated in terms of like how it is in this form. That's what I mean by this whole collective, but also individual. The personality, it's like kind of like the construct of that form, so that it behaves in a certain way collectively. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. So it behaves in a certain way so that it interprets everything around it, whether the thing it's acquiring is either concrete or abstract or both. It still understands it in a certain way. Like, so for example, there's a subconscious and an unconscious. Like for me, when I think of erasers, for example, as an example, it's not just an eraser, right? There's an interpretation of that eraser. I know that sounds funny, but it's like, what is an eraser? Is an eraser, right? Yes, but why do you like different types of erasers versus other types? You know this pinkish, bluish one that like it's very dry kind of feel? There's a weird texture to it. I don't like that. I like these really like soft, kind of chewy sort of feel. I don't know what to call it, chewy. I'm not chewing on it, but you see what I mean? So I like that feeling. I feel like I can, when I'm using a pencil. Okay, I'm writing a pencil. I'm using this one, this pink stuff right here, this eraser. I don't like it either. And why is that? You see what I mean? You can call it eraser all you want, but there's still preference behind it. Because that is part of, not only as the adult, but also as a child, as you grow up, as a toddler, baby, toddler, there's some things that you just come in with that you have preference towards. So therefore, that your interpretation of what you acquired in the first place, even something as concrete as an eraser, is different from another person's interpretation of that and their preferences and all that stuff. So it changes their intention, it changes the way they communicate, it changes how they see things, it changes how they acquire things, it changes how everything they learn, it changes their experiences, it changes everything into everything. That's how unique everything is, and yet we are still all connected. So that's the thing that I'm talking about while we're all connected, is that our inner childlikeness is going to be the one that dictates how present we are, or how open we are to being going back into that childlikeness, to reclaim back and heal and and all that stuff, and therefore going back. And that ties into language acquisition as well. What we call language acquisition. I don't care what it's called. Right? It ties into that. So the fact that we want to generalize and say this works and this works, well, yes, it can work, but we were looking at it more from the, I guess, the foundational construct. Let's use that word again, right? That the fact that we all have this acquisitional ability. We all can breathe. We all can talk. We all can communicate somehow, even if we're not talking. We all can communicate. We all can sense things. We all can. That's the general, right? But the how that happens, that's where it becomes different. So when it comes to something like, for example, translation, there has to be something deeper than just maybe a person, and this is just a speculation of course, is able to watch a movie or TV show with two different, one is dubbed in target language and the subtitles or captions is in a different language, or vice versa, and they can actually pick things up. Maybe that's enough for them. Maybe that is on a subconscious level. It might not even get to the subconscious level. Therefore, they'll still analyze it. But the way I see it is that when I use subtitles, there's several things that happens. One, the main thing that happens is it's distracting. Even if the subtitles is actually in the target language, it's distracting. Because I'm not connecting with the story anymore. I am not connecting with what's going on. And as humans, we are social beings, right? But isn't that a normal fact? I mean, unless I'm wrong, that it's like there are some human beings who are just completely not social. We can conclude on it all we want to, but only you would know instinctively, and this is where it comes down to instinctively, deep down, before even this concept of the conscious, subconsciously. Even if you don't know subconscious, that's the thing about subconscious, we don't know. And that's where I'm getting at with the whole being a child has a lot to do with connection to the subconscious. This is why when we're in our formative years, we absorb everything. That's part of the subconscious. At least to me, that's how it works. So when I tie this into language acquisition, or whatever you want to call it, when you're absorbing something and we're looking at a show and we see something and we see subtitles, what does the subtitles mean? Nothing. They're just there. Did you know the subtitles are technically, I mean, it's a way I instinctively, intuitively understand this, and I'm sure people would be like, yeah, about this. I don't care. Right? It's just like, when we're watching a movie with subtitles, what happens for me is, not only is it distracting, is that it's like, isn't it like for people who are hard of hearing or deaf, right? So those are captioned. That's what I believe it used to be called CC, like closed captions, before the word subtitles came in. I'm not really sure about that. The point is not about the knowledge about that. That's not what's important. To me, that's not what's important right now. Okay? You can do your research all you want. Do what you want. Right? But this isn't about my being right either. I'm saying that I know, for me, myself, that when it comes to languages, I know what works for me. And I've seen this time and time again. And we're talking like probably 99% of the time, where I have these like profiles online and I state exactly what I want. This is how I want. I just want to acquire. No grammar, no translation, no corrections. Okay, that's the other thing. You know? That's the other thing about, we think that corrections are okay. But subconsciously, it's not. Because if you correct some person, it's implying that there's something wrong with them, when there isn't. And we know that internally. When I say no, as in it's just inner knowing, it's like, yeah, I don't feel good about that. That's why when people correct me, even if I correct, and I do this at work too, but I do it because it's a work thing, and I'm being honest with the fact that it's like, I do it because it's part of the job. It's a job, right? And this is why I'm looking towards changing that, where it's just like, I know I could do better than that. You know, again, this isn't about right or wrong. This isn't about all that shit, okay? This isn't about us separating from each other and saying, you're right, I'm wrong, or I'm right, you're wrong. No. When people say do what's right for you, there's a difference between do what's right for you and what is natural. There's a difference. What's right for you might be an ego thing. What's natural is just what's natural, right? And we're talking how this relates to fluency. When I say fluency, I don't mean I know 10 million words. It does not mean like, oh, I have good memory, or I can visualize things, I'm eidetic memory, yada yada yada, whatever the issue is. That's not what it is. Fluency is automatic. Automatic. How can you explain why we're so automatic with our first tongue? Well, that's what we usually see, isn't it? But you can look at there's apparently some research on it. I don't care about the research anymore. For me, what makes sense is what I've seen, and that's what I'm sharing with you guys. That apparently Stephen Krashen did some research on this. One person, I forgot he didn't say what it was, but apparently there was this guy who was, he knew this guy who did research on these tribal communities, I think in South America or something, and they were exposed to like 20-something languages. Is it South America? I don't know. Anyways, right? So, and you notice how I just stopped overthinking it? I just let it go, right? That's one of the things you have to practice doing. It's just like, let it go. Stop trying to be right. Anyways, I'm not here to tell you what to do. The point is, this is my journey of, like, for me, reclaiming inner power. My not giving over my power. Is like, okay, whatever you do, whatever I do, whatever. That kind of story. I think a lot of people have heard that already. So he did this research on, he knew someone, I believe, that did this research on this community, or this person, I don't know, when the people were exposed to 20-something languages. And they were all fluent in multiple languages, like 20-something languages. How is that possible? Because they were exposed to it at a very young age. Now here's the thing, right? We think that it's like, as adults we have a hard time doing that. A lot of us still believe that. When I say believe, I mean it's a subconscious thing. We still believe that that's impossible, because we've come to that point where we've created that boundary, As you get older, your brain apparently solidifies more, so it becomes less of that theta state. Okay, my coach says you go into alpha state, so it becomes a little bit hardened. I believe that's how I see it. Okay, again, that's how I see it. Okay, keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. So you go into this alpha state, so it becomes harder, becomes like more solidified, so it becomes more stubborn. But if you look at it from a perspective of like everything, whether you're talking energetically, emotionally, physically, mentally, whatever you want to do, whatever, right? There's always the way to dissolve something. There's always a way to soften something. Even metal can crumble. Even metal can crumble. Here's the thing. First of all, this is why there's this awakening happening, right? We need to, or not to need to, but we're realizing that it's like, oh, time is just an illusion. But yes, there's this limit of this lifetime right now. So, but so there might be some people who love languages. It's like, well, this is like, it's, I want to rush this. It's like, so that's why it comes back down to like, well, why do you want to go into languages in the first place? If it's from a place of need and a place of lack, because you need to go to some place because you're escaping something else, that one, there's that energy that will lead you towards that direction, and you'll just carry that forward. If it's a lack, you'll get lack. The other thing is that if it's something that you do need in the first place, where does that get you? Like, you're in a rush, right? You're like, oh, I see so many people doing this all the time. Well, I just want to move. I just want to get out of here. Or I'm doing this for work. So it's not fun anymore. So you want to ask yourself, what is it that you're doing this for? Like, why is it you're doing this? What is it about it, right? I think when people don't spend enough time because that's the thing, right? We're spending time, we have this disproportionate and misaligned attitude towards time itself. Because we think that, and that's okay. It's not saying that it's wrong. Disaligned doesn't mean it's wrong. Okay? It just means that we are not understanding what real time is. So you have to ask yourself, the other thing is like, why, if people were to say, I love languages, why would you say that? Where does that come from? Right? Go deep into it. Meditate it. Right? Do a journal. Process it. But that's more of a conscious thing. Going to the emotions, really. And I mean, I think everybody's in their own little journey. And, if you learn from this lifetime, they're just like, oh, you didn't get to achieve this. Because for me, that's what I think, that what I feel and think, that if I don't achieve my goals in, let's say, Ukrainian, for example, if I don't get to be fluent in it, that's what it is going to be. I know that sounds like kind of like, oh, that's it? You're not going to try? Well, no, it's not that. I don't know. For me, what works is being natural. It all comes up. When I say natural, I mean like the connection, the invisible and visible connections of everything. I see it and I can sense it. I don't see it exactly with my eye like this eye, but I see it and I sense it, that everything is connected. My actions, what I say now, affects you. What my actions do in the next few seconds affects what I do in the next moment. And it affects you as well, if you're watching this one, right? Everything is connected. So therefore, when it comes to all this stuff, when it comes to going back to the whole theme of this whole thing, by being childlike, it's reclaiming that. People are wondering, how do you reclaim it? Well, to be honest, I don't know the physical, concrete, actual, practical ways to go about it. Kind of. But because it's a journey. We think that when we want to reclaim it, it's like, oh, I'm going to take a reclaiming class, I'm going to get back my childhood. I'm going to learn the languages or whatever the goal is. And that's the goal, and then that's it. And then we're done. We're finished. The same reasons why I made this video earlier about why levels don't exist. Because we think that it's go from A to Z. And that's an A to Z. And that's it. Right? We have this belief. It's an internal belief that it's like from here to here. Right? And again, it's not about right or wrong. It's not about that. Is it about, well, right? I don't know how to explain it. It's just, when we come to terms with, when I say come to terms, I mean when we learn to gradually get to the terms of, come that process. It's the process. It's the journey. Right? So, I keep going on and on and on, but you see how it's all connected? Even the fact that when we have videos like this, we want to kind of categorize things because that's the way we understand it. But I challenge you to see things as that everything is not really separate. Even when it comes to music myself, when I go into music, we learn notes and all those things. But what really worked is when I just started playing. Now, tying this into language and stuff, you can't just speak a language without getting it first. But you can't also just speak if you don't really understand what it's about. But you can't really understand it completely, again, with the whole eraser analogy thing. Actually, not even analogy, the reality is like, interpretation of it, your preference about what is it that, that you come in with that preference too as a child, as a baby. You just know instinctively, you just know. This is what I like, this is how I do it, this is what I like, this is how I like it, this is what I like it, why I like it. Right? Or why I don't like it, etc., 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 etc. Right? If you could just sense what I'm trying to say without overanalyzing it, and kind of like, you can apply it to your life if you want to, but it really comes down to surrendering. One is surrendering, and when I say surrender, I don't mean like I'm not going to do anything. For those who haven't heard that, look up Eckhart Tolle. Look up everything that's been going on now. You can look up Joe Dispenza's stuff. You can look up Teal Swan stuff. You can look up so many other people who have shared their experiences with the world. It really boils to one simple thing, just being. That's part of being surrendering. That's part of surrendering itself. So children surrender, even if they cry, it's like, it's a physical reaction. But as adults, we interpret that as just like, oh no, it's so horrible. You label it right away and we go into the dispolarity of like good, bad. That's why we stop the child from crying, when in fact it's not. The child just needs to release that crying. The child just needs to release the emotion. Rather, it's not so much release, but process the emotions. So all you need to do is just be there and be like, okay, it's all right where you need to be, right? But most of us didn't get that. So how does this relate to the language stuff? You're probably wondering, it's like, where is he going with all this stuff? Blah, blah, blah. Well, it's all connected. Right? So we can go into debates about this, but it really, I'm not going to go into debates about it at all. What I'm trying to say is that it actually comes down to surrendering. Surrendering is that sort of present love that is inside all of us, that is the natural state of being. So how this ties into language is when we're in this natural state of being, of joy and fun. It's not the language even that's really what's important. It's the tool and how we're using it. So for example, like a toy, for example. Right? Why do you think some people think a lot of adults come across this a lot? Adults think it's like, oh, I have to replace the toy all the time. It's not because children are bored. It's because they want to experience. When I say want, it's not a want that we think is like, oh, they really want to just experience and just, you don't have to buy them new toys. You just have to be creative. That's the creative impulse that's in every baby and toddler. We all come with that creative impulse. Creativity doesn't just mean we're doing also. Creative also means we're also absorbing. In fact, it starts with absorption. You see how this ties into acquisition, acquiring. how this ties into being present, how this ties into sort of this inner knowing that it's like, oh, this is a preference that I want. That, okay, so there's a link between an understanding, a deeper understanding, and a deeper, even deeper understanding of both the concrete concepts and these abstract concepts that we ourselves connected to and related to with our preferences, and the intelligence, the inner intelligence, and our likes and our dislikes that we came in with. And therefore, right? So again, going back to the whole thing about the whole movie thing with subtitles and, you know, in one target language and the other in target language. So for me, what didn't work is, what doesn't work is that whole subtitle thing, period. Whether it's in a translation or not, because it doesn't work, it's distracting. And the other thing is that when I look at it, when I translated things, even if it's not just grammar, even if it's like pure so-called acquisition, what happens is that I perceive that concept in the way I perceive that concept in the language I pre-acquired or acquired before. You know what I'm saying? This is what I'm already familiar with. See, there's a keyword there, familiarity. But it also ties down to the familiarity we know, or so-called the preferences, the likes and dislikes, and that inner thing that we came in with. We think that it's like the preferences are like learned. Well, those are added preferences. There's an inner preference. When I say inner preference, you just know. I think we need to go back into that whole intuition thing. And a lot of people might also probably think that, like, I'm not going anywhere, I'm not solidifying things, I'm not like organizing things and all that stuff. That's fine. Because that's the way I don't know how to explain it in words. This is one of the things it kind of ties in with my self-worth, where it's just like when people don't accept it. And that's one of the things I'm learning myself. It's just like, okay, that's fine. Because I can't do it, I can't really put it in words. But I wanted to really just share with you that what works for me is something simple as being childlike. What does Stephen Cratchit say? Fun, easy, compelling. Right? What he means by fun is fun, like what children do. Toddlers. I keep saying toddler and babies because that's more that's stronger there. Right? And easy, meaning you're not trying too hard, right? And compelling means that when I say, for me, the word compelling is, I try to change it to the word interactive. When I feel like I'm connecting, really connecting to what's going on, I'm just like enjoying it. The good and the bad, the ugly, whatever, right? It's all part of it. Again, children, we perceive them as like having a bad or good experience because that's the way we see it. We like to put our labels into that experience that they're doing, that they're experiencing, and yet it's like that they don't need that. They just need you to be present. So same thing we do when we are talking about language acquisition. I'm doing this because language acquisition is just a label for it. We wouldn't need all these talking and yapping and all that stuff if we just went into that. We just went into our childlings. However, that's the other thing. We came here to learn. This whole thing about me not agreeing with you, feeling disregarded, invalidated, the self-worth thing, that's the part of the thing too. That's all part of it. What you experience, what I experience, what he experiences, what they experience, etc., etc., etc. But you see how this all magic comes through? How it's all like, even in the chaos that this whole video has been in, it's all part of it. So, it comes back down to childlikeness, right? What works for me is what works for me. What works for you is what works for you. And we have to be honest with ourselves. is that question we're saying, is that thing we're claiming that what works for me, is that coming from this illusion of this reality, of this 3D form, or the true essence, which is like completely like immensely powerful, which is source energy? Is it actually, where is it coming from? So for me, I know what works for me, and I've seen it time and time again, that it's like when people don't understand what I'm saying, or if I see something and it doesn't work for me, I get this strange, well, not strange, but like this feeling right away, just like, I don't know what he wants. So right away they go like this, I don't want to communicate anymore. But it's okay, then they're in their own journey. For me personally, I would myself try to communicate, even if it hurts, even if you're like, I don't know what you're saying, I'm confused, I communicate it, I process it. Everything is a learning process, really, right? So again, coming back to this whole thing, how it ties into language acquisition is reclaiming our childlikeness, going back to inner child stuff as we go into this language stuff, as we go into self-worth. Why are we doing this? The claims we make, right? So basically what we need is to sum it all up, it's like a reboot, right? And I think we're going through a reboot anyways. I know we're going through a reboot, so I think that's it. Thank you for watching. See you guys later. Hope you enjoyed the background. See you guys later. Bye.